Career pivots are more common than ever. With almost 50% of all professionals considering some type of career change, the gig economy, remote work, honestly have really changed the game for us and what it means to build long lasting careers. And I just want to say, while changing careers can be really terrifying in the moment, sometimes it's exactly what you need to be able to grow as a person and as a professional. But it also may be essential to you finding your purpose or actually living it out. Welcome back to my channel. If you saw my previous video, or welcome if this is your very first video. So whether it is a goal of yours to change careers this year or you're just curious, this video is for you. If you watched my last video, then you know that my career has had several pivots. So in this video, I'll share a little bit more about the different career pivots I've had, talk about the top reasons why many people are afraid to change careers, also give you signs that you're ready to change careers. I think that's a missing piece as well. And then last but not least, I'll give you some research-backed ways to make sure that you pivot successfully, but I'll also share my personal framework for how I had successful career pivots. I had three big career pivots. One of them that I did talk about was how I moved from working in the education space to actually working in tech, or what I would consider to be an industry switch. And I'll talk in my next segment kind of about the different types of levels in terms of the different types of degree of pivots that you might be making. But that was at an industry level. And that were some personal reasons for why I made that change, but also some long-term career goals why I made that change. The second major pivot I made in my career is I moved from the sales function. So working in sales was one of the key ways of how I was able to successfully pivot from working in a non-related industry into the tech industry, which was through a sales role. But after working in sales for a period of time, I realized some things about myself, my personality, my character traits that actually made me better suited for relationship management or client management, which can be considered a different variation of sales, which is really focused on growing the customer relationship with your company, finding ways to find new partnerships, and also grow potentially the amount of money that they're spending with your particular company. And then I also made another function switch, which was actually moving into product marketing management, which is something I highlighted briefly in my previous video, but that was also a significant pivot for me as well, because at that point I was learning that in terms of my passions for storytelling, writing, research, that I actually enjoyed thinking about what are the stories that we're telling about our product that is helping more customers and people be more interested in our company and our brand and our product and the services that we provide. And then last but not least, another major switch in terms of my career that I made, which was actually related to the company size. So after leaving education, I started in a small startup before pivoting into a growth stage company, meaning they are getting ready for whatever exit they're planning to have, and then moving into a corporate tech company, ones that are those big names that you are familiar with, like a Samsung, like those names that you recognize with immediately. And those are the big three pivots that I made in my career. Up next, I'm going to talk about what are the key reasons for what holds people back from pivoting in their careers. And I'm also going to dive deeper into these different levels or degrees I would think about when it comes to pivoting in your career. As you can imagine, there is some big, scary stuff for a lot of people when it comes to pivoting careers. And there are a lot of factors that come into play. But before diving into that, I think it's important to kind of create some common language or thoughts around what are some of the reasons why people want to pivot careers and what are the various degrees? So one of the first ones that I think about is macro, which is thinking higher level. This can be at a global level. This can be at a domestic level. This could be regulatory. There can be some significant factors that are at the industry level that are not in alignment with your personal values or what you believe your purpose is. And those can be reasons, or for the kind of quality of life you want to live. And there can be reasons for why you may not necessarily want to be a part of that. So for example, if you're working in the tech industry and you're noticing that AI is becoming a big topic across the board, it's honestly across a lot of different industries. And maybe that is something that you are super excited about, right? You love that this is a disruptive technology and you want to understand how it can impact things from a societal perspective, from an economic perspective. And that might be a macro reason why you potentially want to pivot careers into the AI space. A second degree or level would be cultural, environmental, or norms affiliated with that type of career. So for example, if you work in management consulting, it wasn't until the pandemic that it was normal for you to do more video conferencing with your clients, with your teams. Pre-pandemic, it was expected that you were traveling 4 out of 5 days out of the week on client site with your team. And that changed significantly with the pandemic, but also just given the fact that remote work is becoming more widely accepted. Communal is the third level, and this is actually thinking more differently about who do you want to be working with, who do you want to serve, what are the type of character types, the type of values that they have that maybe you want to be a part of. So for example, I loved working specifically in a role like product marketing because it is a very cross-functional role. In terms of my day-to-day work, I am working with different people across different teams. We're working on different types of problems, and therefore my day-to-day looks very different. I do not have a routine day-to-day. And then the last degree is actually personal. So this is really rooted in what you believe your purpose is, your values, your morals, your ethics. And this is really thinking about what is in alignment with the person that I am and the person that I'm becoming, and making choices and decisions that support that. So for example, if you have certain ideology and certain political views around healthcare, you might not necessarily want to work in certain health institutions because they are not in alignment with your personal beliefs. So those are the 4 different levels that I would say are degrees to think about when it comes to career pivots or changes. Now, getting into the top reasons why people might be afraid to actually pivot, the number one reason I think most of us can agree with is failure, right? And one of the things that I want to remind people is that you don't fail, you either win or you learn. So think about something that you did that was very big, very scary. You were afraid of failing, you were afraid of something changing in your lifestyle, disappointing someone, and think about how even if it didn't pan out the way you wanted it to, it actually ended up being a source of redirection and brought you closer to your next step, which is probably where you are now. And at one point you were grateful for, but now you're ready for something different. The second one I think is huge, especially given up most of us are growing up with social media and we're kind of comparing ourselves to what other people are doing in their lives at this stage, or we're doing at this stage in their lives. And that's fear of judgment. And I think one of the things that you have to think about is comparison is truly the thief of joy. And the reality is the people who support you, the people who are a part of your community want to see you win. They might give you some advice. They might give you some things to think about. At the end of the day, it's your decision. But the folks who really value you, the people who really care about you, are going to be supportive of you. And they're going to find ways to support you in this decision because it's your journey. This third one I think is pretty difficult for people who are very achievement oriented, and I'll say that this was actually something that was very difficult for me, which was the fear of losing progress. When I think about where I was in high school, where I was in college, and I was kind of like checking off these accolades, I was checking off these things off of this roadmap that I had developed for myself at a very young age. And I was afraid of realizing like maybe someone's going to see me pivoting into a sales role as taking a step back, right? And the reality is that this is your journey and your journey alone. And you are the only person that's going to decide what is a worthwhile step back to get you a leap forward. And you are the only person that's going to decide if something was worth the time, worth the investment, because you learned something from it or you grew from it. And I think that's something you kind of have to remind yourself and focus less about what others think and really focus on your internal locus of control. And then the last one is the fear of making the wrong choice. In the next segment, we'll talk about kind of some of the reasons why pivots are very scary from a standpoint of planning. But I think making the wrong choice is something that keeps people from even making a step or making a change. And I think that doubt is something that you have to process and figure out, developing your own system of resetting and really focusing on what is in your locus of control and what is outside of it. And again, if it's your journey, only you get to decide what was considered wrong. So instead of seeing a less than ideal outcome as a step backward or a wrong choice, I would say frame it as a learning, right? Maybe you learned that working in a startup of that size is not for you, right? Or maybe you learned that that particular role actually is something you're interested in. You just don't necessarily care about that product, right? So kind of see every decision, every outcome as a learning opportunity instead of seeing it as something wrong, because you are the one that truly gets to dictate that. Now we'll talk about kind of the frequent reasons or the true reasons that actually lead people to wanting to change careers. So as I mentioned earlier, there's 4 kind of different reasons why people are afraid to change careers or pivot successfully. And now I'm going to talk about what are the 4 reasons that people know they need to pivot careers, or signs that this is time for you to kind of start thinking about your new path or your new approach. So, the number one reason, and I do think that this reason is impacting this generation and a lot of folks that are currently in the workforce at a higher rate, just given the pandemic and how the pandemic led to so many different workplace changes. And the number one is persistent burnout or boredom. So, if you are consistently feeling drained, uninterested, unexcited about the work that you're doing, this probably means that there's something misaligned in terms of you and the work that you're doing, and potentially the role, the company, the industry. And one of the piece of advice that I would recommend is really take note of how frequently you feel this way. This can be a tally system. You could keep a note of like if this is something that's consistent daily, or if this is something that comes with ebbs and flows due to the seasonality of your job or whatever that may be. But also pay attention how it shows up in your body and how it potentially can show up in your relationships. Personally, this was a big factor for me, was seeing how the ebbs and flows were actually negatively impacting my personal relationships. It was also making it harder for me to stay connected with people that I worked with. And that was one of the key indicators that let me know at one point or another that I needed to consider a change in my career. The second one is lack of motivation or creativity. So if you're finding that not only are you consistently finding yourself bored, but you're also lacking of ideas. You're realizing you're not as innovative as you once were when it came to your role. And that can also tell you that you're ready for a change. But one of the things that I would say is take note of what could have potentially changed, whether it's team changes, product changes, reorganizations, what could have potentially led to your lack of motivation, because this could also let you know and give you some clues around career paths or potentially industries that you might be more interested in. This third one, I actually think, is definitely an environmental or cultural degree, and this is feeling undervalued. While it could potentially happen at like a larger level, for example, if you're working in a role that potentially could be replaced with automation or something like that, that could potentially lead to a feeling of undervalue. But I think most people feel undervalued when they're working in work environments where there are changes happening around them and their skills are not being utilized, or they are not feeling appreciated as an individual. So this could be communal but also personal. And I think it's important to understand that even if it happened or was caused by a macro, environmental, communal, or personal level, you should feel valued in any work environment that you have. So keep note of those feelings and notice how frequently they're happening. And if they're happening more frequently, it's probably time for a change. The last one, I think we can all probably connect with this one. It's normally called Sunday Scaries. I don't know about y'all, but a lot of my work messages are saying Happy Friday Eve. Essentially, people are experiencing anxiety or reluctance about going to work regularly. And this can be on a weekly basis, this can be a daily basis, but essentially, if you are starting to dread work in any fashion, it's probably time to make some type of change. Now, what degree of change is something that you'll have to reflect and decide upon, but at the end of the day, it's time to make a change. And up next, we'll talk about how you can really think about these different factors to help you make a smoother transition and help you prepare financially, mentally, as well as strategically. And then I'll talk about kind of my own framework for change. It's like any life change, you should definitely have some type of plan to help you pivot your career successfully. And this is not just because of financial reasons, this isn't just because of timing, this is also just around making sure that you are really able to put your best foot forward and you're actually giving yourself time to make a pivot that will give you the most outcomes that are aligned with what you want, right? And I understand that given the job market right now and everything that's going on, that there may be potentially some situations where you are involuntarily changing due to layoffs, or voluntarily. Either way, I just think it's important to start kind of formulating a formal plan that obviously you can adapt as soon as certain things change. So I'm going to start with the research backed, and then I also will share with you my personal framework. So research backed focuses on 3 different areas: strategic planning, timing, as well as flexibility. So when it comes to strategic planning, I think it starts with one, getting a clear focus on what type of pivot you want to make, whether that is a industry, function, cultural, company, personal, what type of pivot you actually want to make. And there are 3 things that I think are very helpful for helping you figure out what are maybe areas of interest that you should focus on? So, one of the very obvious ones are figuring out what skills you currently have in your current role that are transferable and what are the different types of roles that they easily transfer in. Given the climate that we're in, I do think it's important that you're being strategic about what type of switches you're making. So, for example, if it requires you to have a different type of degree or education, knowing that and creating an effective timeline for that. But how can you also make some pivots now that are getting you closer to that larger goal of potentially getting a professional degree if that new role or function requires that of you? Another one that I think is super underrated and people should be doing it not just when you're looking for a job, but just when you are gauging if you're on the right path is networking and informational interviews. So, networking with people that you know, people you have something in common with, but maybe have never met before, reaching back out to people you do know and haven't connected with in a while, former colleagues, sorority, fraternity, those professional associations that you were a member of, and just getting new insights on different industries and different roles, and maybe if you should be exploring them. Another one is career exploration, and I think this is something that you can easily attain even if you're currently employed or not. Finding new projects or new opportunities to flex different skills, get different skills at your current job, so being a little more entrepreneurial. Side hustles, so starting a side hustle that will allow you to experiment. If you want to go into marketing, maybe you start your own YouTube channel or you create your own online presence and you get to test out some of these different marketing applications with. Boards, consider joining different boards or even volunteering for an organization you care about and seeing if they'll take you on a volunteer basis for a project that could potentially allow you to test out financial skills or test out donation or relationship building skills. The second one is timing. I do think it's incredibly important that you do market research to really understand what are the growing functions and industries, following the trends and market demands of any industry that you're actually interested in working in. I think one of the things that's super important and played out very well for me was even though I was coming from an education background, I knew how to use their lingo and talk in a way that showed them that I knew something about this industry despite never working in it formally. Also, seek expert or experienced professional opinions. This can be informational interviews, this can be media. So, going out and seeing, hey, if the CEO of that particular company is doing an interview with this particular podcaster, this is a great opportunity for you to learn and see if there is some trends that you could potentially call out or company news that you can call out when you're doing these interviews. Another one is flexibility. And I think this one is easily underrated. And the reason I say that is because while you might come up with a short list of companies and industries that you are super excited about and want to work towards being in, I do think it's important to be open-minded to different titles, functions, industries, business models, even structures, or even employment types. So maybe, for example, you aren't able to get a full-time position at this point, but maybe you're able to get a contract role, or maybe you're able to volunteer with a contract to potentially hire long-term. So I do think it's important to be flexible, but I also acknowledge that this requires a certain level of preparation as well as privilege. And in order to make these types of changes, I do think it's important that you start evaluating some of this stuff earlier rather than later. And I'll talk about that when I get into my own framework. But then also find unique ways to get experience and insights. I do think that it's about creativity in this job market. It's about figuring out how you can be seen as a thought expert or a thought leader in a certain space, even if you don't necessarily have that direct experience. Maybe it is your unique perspective that's actually the added value. So now I'm going to segue and talk about like my personal life experience and how I set up my frameworks to be able to pivot career successfully. So as I mentioned, from my personal experience, these are some additional tips. This is also my personal framework for if I'm making a significant career change or even a life change. These are the three things I do every single time. The first one is prepare financially. And I cannot emphasize this enough. As someone who has made career pivots unemployed and career pivots employed, I do think it's important that you have developed one, a financial acumen for personal finance, but two, you have done what you needed to do so that you are not making decisions out of desperation. So for example, when I left education, I had a certain amount of savings that I was living off of that gave me a time clock or a timeline for, I need to successfully make this pivot in order to make this happen by this time, right? Because this is financially how I have set myself up. And that starts with personal budgeting and debt management. So obviously paying down high interest debt, making sure you have a safety cushion. You might have to scale back on some of your lifestyle expenses just to give yourself a little more time, especially in this job market. Secondly, if you have a good financial cushion, you can make investments in your career the same way I would recommend anyone making investments when it comes to their financial portfolio, right? Again, I am not a personal financial advisor, but this is the stuff that I believe will make it easier for you to make a smoother transition or pivot in your career. So invest in your skills. And this is different degrees, right? Well, the premium is going and getting a degree and spending the sticker price on it. Whereas the other can just be taking online certifications, reading, podcasts, research, really just staying in tune with what is going on in the market and what can make you a stronger candidate. And I do think skill development is a significant part of that, especially if you already have the transferable skills. What can you do to close some of those gaps to make you an easier candidate switch and seen as a viable candidate for a new role, a new function, or a new company? And then last but not least, if you are currently employed, I definitely recommend maximizing your employee benefits for your career gain. Most companies have some type of learning and development program. For example, I've worked at companies that had amazing public speaking programs, so I took those courses. Professional development. If you know that you are allotted a professional development stipend where you get to go out and find courses or conferences that you get to go to and then be reimbursed for it, take advantage of that. If you know that you're interested in marketing, maybe you go to a broader conference so that you can get exposure to a different function outside of the one you currently have. Wellness benefits, and I won't sleep on wellness because I do believe, and I'll talk about this in my next step, is you do have to prepare emotionally and mentally for a pivot because you don't know how long it's going to take. You might encounter a lot of rejection. In fact, you probably will encounter a lot of rejection, but again, rejection is just redirection. So that's why I do think it's important that you are practicing self-reflection and realizing that you're doing the work that's giving you that mental fortitude and that resilience. Because I do believe that if you know that you're doing something in alignment with who you are and what you believe, that what is for you will be yours. Developing a stronger self-awareness. I took a ton of personality assessments even before I started thinking about what kind of pivots I wanted to make to help me understand my natural strengths that would actually make me better suited for certain roles or potentially would keep me away from roles because of just my interests and it doesn't align with who I am. So the Gallup Strengths is a really great assessment. 16 personalities, Type Finder for career profiling, I think it is. Those are just 3 really great assessments that I personally think will give you a lot of support when thinking about, what kind of careers would be in alignment with just who I am naturally. And then obviously you can do your own research, informational interviews to get to a point where you're either doing a process of elimination or you're just getting a very clearer view of what type of switch you want to make. And then managing your stress for real and heal. I cannot emphasize this enough. If you are working in a toxic workplace or work environment, or you have been experiencing psychological burnout repetitively, you have to heal. If you don't heal, it's going to be very difficult for you to have a wide open perspective of what is out there. You're going to be having a hard time scrutinizing and being critical about the opportunities that are being placed in front of you. You're not going to be on it because you are operating at 200 miles per hour and you've been doing it consistently to the point that your body is in a constant heightened state of stress. So I cannot emphasize that enough, is that you will have to manage your stress and you will have to heal. So that's where the wellness piece comes in, where you need to be active, taking care of yourself, having confidence, and having people that you can share what you're going through, but also process it effectively so that you really can put your best foot and your best self forward in these processes. And then last but certainly not least is plan realistically and give yourself grace. And what I mean by that is you do want to prepare a plan, but also be flexible enough that if you need to stay at your current employer a little bit longer, or if you might have to take a contract role for the short term because you got to pay your bills, be flexible with your plan, but know that you have one because it will give you some structure and also give you some direct, tangible actions that you need to take daily. give yourself way more time than you think if possible. I understand, like as I mentioned earlier, that some people are exiting voluntarily where others are not, and some folks are currently employed. So I would say do your own assessment. I would never want you to stay in a workplace where you are feeling severely undervalued to the point that it is causing you physical or psychological harm. But you do need to come up with some type of plan, and you do want to give yourself more time than less. I also think when you start formulating a plan, that will help you manage your reactions to things that you may be experiencing in the workplace better. For example, if you know that you have a supplementary income, you won't be necessarily as thrown astray when you are experiencing certain microaggressions or certain things at work, because you acknowledge that if all be all, right, I'll be okay. And I think you have to do what you need to do financially, emotionally, and mentally to ensure that you are able to operate effectively in whatever space and wherever you are in your plan. Also, things change and so do plans. So having a growth mindset is exceptionally important. See every rejection as a redirection, and also know what is for you, and no one can take that away from you. And then celebrate each win, no matter how big or how small. You found a good routine for applying to jobs. You found an awesome resume that is getting you closer and closer in each candidacy process. You heard back from that C-suite executive that you've been wanting to talk to. You found that awesome podcast that you heard about somewhere else, but you were struggling to find it. Celebrate every single win, because that is what's going to keep you the motivation to keep pushing through during this process, because the reality is you'll learn a lot about yourself as well as who you are and want to be as a professional during this process. And I think celebrating each step is a huge win. That is it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching it. Subscribe to my channel and my newsletter. There's a link in the bio if you'd like to learn more just around career growth, personal growth, business, or just random musings from me. Also, I really do want to hear from you, so please share in the comments if you've pivoted careers, why, what worked, what didn't work, and any learning you'd like to share for this community. Thanks again, and I'll see y'all soon.